So, just kind of before we get started, while you are admitting more people, are there more people who are still in the queue, Mohita? I can't see them, so
Not
that's why
yet,
I'm asking.
Prof. No, no. So I'll keep doing that as and when they. Yes, there are now. So I'll admit them. I'll keep
Okay.
admitting them.
Okay, thank you. So essentially, the idea of open source, one of the things that came in, and some of you were probably too young that time, uh, started coming in when Linux, the operating system was built, and this was built during the times when Microsoft and Unix were on the rise. Everybody, whenever we learned programming, I started programming in a Unix operating system, and then Microsoft came in a big way. And that can tell you how long I've been in this space. Windows 95 onwards, we started doing a lot of things in the Microsoft space. Before that, mostly all our programming was done in Unix. Uh, Now, the open source construct with Linux was, the idea was that we would build a community, and that community would actually build software. And sometimes it's difficult to kind of envision, especially in a service environment like in India, as to what are we doing with open source software. What is the whole purpose? What do I gain from open source software? And open source software will give you an avenue to be able to not only demonstrate your skills, but to be able to collaborate and work with multitude of people. So essentially, you're not going to be charging for your software development, because software development, a bespoke software development is more like, with the advent of AI, everybody, like, it's to be able to write a code is not longer a big no longer a big challenge, but to be able to build solutions, to be able to build a community around your solutions is something which will be the differentiator, which will continue to be the differentiator. And people who've been in playing in this space, I just call upon Sunil and Meet with their with their vast experience in application development. They will be able to kind of validate that software development is not only just getting a specification and then writing code, but software development is much more to it. It's to be able to solve a problem. And solving a problem doesn't mean that you kind of get a contract to solve a problem, but you actually solve a problem. And then when people are using your solution to be able to solve the problem, that's when you kind of rise and shine. That's their moment to rise and shine. And in this process, this is one specialized track in the hack series, which is the consent manager. And I just want to kind of tell you that we are still in very early talks, but it is most likely going to happen that we this would have the blessings of MITI, which is Ministry of Information Technology of the Government of India. Especially because there are so many regulations that have come in. So I'm just going to kind of get started by kind of presenting to you a few things. The Digital Personal Data Protection Act 2023, Government of India, uh, asks companies to be able to have certain mechanisms to be able to protect data and personal data mostly. So personally identifiable information has to have a different kind of a mechanism. Suppose you store your date of birth, you store your age, you store your address, you store your phone number, right? These are things which are personally identifiable. These are things with which people can kind of reach out to you even without your consent. Yeah. And that's where the Digital Personal Data Protection Act comes into play, and this enforcement is going to be is really going to come in a big way. Like many of you must be going to visit friends in apartment, and the security guard is like, okay, what is your name, what is your phone number, right? I mean, that is actually a Digital Personal Data Protection Act violation, because they cannot ask you for your phone number. That's not allowed, right? And if they ask you, they have to have a mechanism to be able to make sure that it is secure, right? And that's where decentralization comes into play in a big way, because the current Web2 systems are designed on a database based system. So database based systems do not have the ability to be able to kind of mask that information. Of course, from an application level you can, but it is very easily accessible. So how can we kind of create transparency? Suppose I go to a building and the watchman says, okay, I need your phone number to be able to give you an OTP. Yeah. But I mean, I don't want to give them my phone number because that person will have my phone number. So how will I be able to kind of demonstrate that actually I have the ability? Somebody has given me the option to be able to come to this apartment. So there has to be some kind of a decentralized based system which would be able to tokenize my access to that particular building. But at the same time, if that token that I have, which gives me the access to access the building, is I share it with somebody, yeah, or somebody steals it from me, right? How will the watchman validate that with their limited technical tools? Now, this is not only a building access problem. This is a simple example that I'm giving you, where we will be facing a lot of issues with the current system, and that is where we see a big opportunity for entrepreneurs, for developers, for innovators to be able to use, or build around the Digital Personal Data Protection Act. So MITI will be partnering with us at some point of time to be able to build all these different modules, to build all these different solutions that we are talking about. And when I show you this might look to be very complex, but this is a big elephant, okay? And we will be able to build different parts of the elephant and then construct, put it all together, to be able to help people build applications which would be compliant to the Digital Personal Data Protection Act. And as you know, Algorand is an enterprise grade blockchain. The transaction costs are very low. It is highly scalable. The response is very fast. When you have any kind of a transaction, suppose you are doing an Ethereum based transaction, right? The cost of transaction is going to be very high to be able to make this scale up in any kind of a platform. Other platforms might have a higher response time. Algorand has a very low response time. So it is very well suited for systems like this. Like, if I get into the door of somebody and I scan with my QR code whether I have access to drop, something. Suppose it's a Swiggy which drops things inside your house, and your house has a digital lock, but you've given them a consent for a certain period of time. Algorand can be the solution where you could have decentralization also. You can protect the privacy of the person who's coming in also, and you can protect your own privacy also at the same time. So this is what Algorand brings in. Now, what happens, as I was mentioning, with any kind of consent management systems? Yeah, and feel free to stop me if you have any questions. Yeah, so the basic centralized consent management systems do not have transparency because it is the control of one company. Yeah, and if we want to kind of, if there is some kind of an audit, or if there is some kind of breach in data, there is no way we will be able to protect ourselves. Like, we've had lots of examples with credit card, like Visa and Mastercards have been breached in the past, and people data have gone. And I've got an email saying, make sure that your credit score or your nobody has kind of applied because your identity has been stolen. Yeah. So, and then we are on your own. So these are some very important things that we need to take into consideration. And on top of that, the government is also going to start enforcing compliance. So essentially, a company which is having personally identifiable information will have to be able to present to the government how they are securing the data. And if they are not able to present, they will be penalized, they will be fined, they might be closed. And if they have to build these solutions right from the very beginning, like right from scratch rather, it is going to take a lot of money and a lot of effort, which means the smaller players are not going to be able to do anything. So it's only the big companies which will be able to, maybe two or three companies in India will have the monopoly to be able to do a consent management system, which is not good for the country, because then they can control the prices, they can control everything, and that's not how technology is meant to be. Technology is meant to democratize things. So that's the key problem with the challenge consent management system. And this might, don't get overwhelmed when you see this, but this is my architecture design, all the things that we could possibly build. And I will be getting into each one of these boxes to be able to show you the opportunity. Now, you don't have to build everything. Now, I just also want to mention that when we are talking open source, we are not asking you to build a consent manager. We are asking you to look at some modules in consent manager which you can build as open source software and publish, which could eventually be a part of a big consent manager system. Yeah, so we could have a dashboard, we could have some kind of a consent record, so on and so forth. So I'll go into each one of these, so I just don't want to kind of spell it out. Again, these slides will also be put up in the hack page for you to be able to go back and refer. Okay, this is how I am visualizing the consent manager, because kind of after having had some discussions with Miti and read through the India's Digital Privacy Protection Act, I think that these are things that we could build in an open source model to be able to support people, to be able to support application, to be able to have uh, to be able to have applications to be able to be compliant to the regulations. Yeah. Any questions so far? And since I'm not able to see you guys, on my screen, can somebody help me if there are any questions? Yeah, Mohita or Maruti, please, if you could just step in and just help me out if there are some questions. If somebody raises their hand,
Yes, bro,
yeah.
for sure, for sure.
Uh, uh, so far, so good. Or if there are any questions, please feel free to unmute your mic or ask a question. I'm just going to wait for 10 seconds and then move on. Okay. So this is the overarching architecture. Now what I'm going to do is I want to get into each one of these boxes and explain to you what are the possible things that you could build and what is your opportunity. Yeah. Again, I want to mention you are not building the whole thing here. It is impossible to be able to build this whole consent manager for one person in a small hackathon. Yeah. What we are going to be doing is we are sourcing people to be able to build smaller modules for each of these blocks, and then eventually we will put the whole story up. And by the way, once we are able to build this successfully, we expect Miti to be able to kind of verify, validate, and also certify it. So essentially, the kind of opportunity that is here is that Miti could say that your module is a module which is compliant to the Privacy Protection Act, and anybody who uses it will automatically have will be able to demonstrate that they are in line with that act, which is a big deal. I feel that this kind of an opportunity does not come every day. If I was on a in the in fact, I also plan to build a few things myself. So this architecture I am planning to open source also, from a documentation perspective, for anybody to innovate and build. Again, the somebody asked me, right, everything is going to be in blockchain. The answer is no, everything is not going to be in blockchain, but the gas pedal is going to be in blockchain. Essentially, the mindset of this architecture is a decentralized architecture to be able to make sure that this is democratic, this is easily accessible, this is cross chain. In fact, you will see there is a cross platform consent interoperability also, which I'm building here. So it doesn't mean that if you are building in some other chain, or if you're building a web 2 application, you can still talk to a web 3 application on certain things to be able to verify it. However, since this hackathon is centered around Algorand, I will mostly be talking from the perspective of Algorand, and that's essentially what the competition is. But as you can tell, there could be certain components which could kind of very well flow into other chains also, and other web 2 systems also. However, in the scope for our hackathon is Algorand only. Now, the first thing that you will be I mean, if you are a front end person, if you have a more of a design, user design kind of a mindset, what you could possibly build, having looked at this whole workflow process, is how data consent, how what would be a user dashboard, what would be a configuration dashboard, who are the 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 administrator of the system, how are the users going to be managed. You could create some kind of an interfaces which would help kind of define that how we can grant, revoke, or even view the different consent. Like, suppose I give you a consent for to view my records for 30 minutes. You are a doctor and I give you a consent to view my records for 30 minutes because I'm in your office right now. All my digital records you will be able to access, but once I'm gone, you will not be able to view those records. Yeah. So how can we grant, revoke, and view? So this is very, very interesting perspective, and you will be, just visualize it with some kind of a use case and build the user dashboards. Yeah. And that dashboard could be an open source interface which people can build on or expand on to be able to build different applications. So this could be a UX interface with some kind of an interface to blockchain. Now comes the real action point here, right? How are we going to kind of maintain the consent records? This is a very important piece. Okay, so essentially what you will be used is how do we record a consent as an event in a blockchain. So suppose somebody gives consent, what are the mechanisms with which that consent will be recorded? Yeah. So is how will a smart contract trigger the consent? What are the different events in the consent that could possibly happen? So how can we kind of uh, have a event like a grant, revoke, or update set up in the blockchain? What are the different kinds of metadata you can store? What are the best practices that you could build? Or you could build some kind of a stack that these are the metadata that I could store. Okay, suppose I have to do some kind of a consent historical retrieval, right? Suppose I need to know who all have got consent, but not their personally identifiable information, but some kind of an information. You will be able to see that, right? So this is a very small module, but this could also be used in the later module which I will be showing, which has to do with verification. The next thing is the automation smart contracts, right? The smart contracts which could automatically revoke consents. So it could have a time-based consent revocation process. You could have a real-time notification. So suppose you could open a port and see who all have consent at this time. You could have consent deployment into the blockchain. You could have continuous monitoring of the consent state. So suppose I have given somebody a consent, whether that person has accessed the data or not, or whether that person, how many times that person accessed the data. These are certain things that you could build by a smart contract module. So this is the module 3, which, so essentially I showed you 3 modules: user dashboard, consent records, and smart contract automation. So these are smaller modules that could be built. Okay. Now, to be able to have this idea of cross-platform consent interoperability, suppose I have a Web2 application. I don't want to change my Web2 application. My Web2 application is to be able to give access to people to come into my community. I'm going to use this simple example because I think many of you must have seen it. Okay. And I have this Web2 application. Now, how do I kind of connect it with a blockchain-based system? Yeah. So that system could you could create some kind of an API interface that this Web2 application can call to be able to kind of check for a particular token. Yeah. So essentially there could be a token in the blockchain which will define that this person has a consent. You could have a life cycle that the of the whole of the token management. You could have a validation process outside the blockchain. So you could make a small Web2 interface and show how a person actually has consent can be shown on a Web2 interface. Yeah. Or even another Web3 dApp also. Doesn't matter. But this is essentially a very interesting thing. And by tokenizing, you will be able to kind of build those kind of modules. And of course, you should be able to kind of use you have to optimize the cost, because don't forget, if every time a consent management costs 2 rupees or 5 rupees, that would no longer be sustainable. So how do I optimize my transactions? So you could create some kind of an optimization mechanism. You could have an off-chain lock or something which kind of just writes an hash on a periodic basis. And if it writes the hash on the blockchain on a periodic basis, then you would be able to minimize the cost because your transaction cost gets reduced. Also, you could have how you would store your consent token metadata. So where would be the consent token metadata be stored? Okay, and how can the consent token metadata be kind of queried? So this is essentially creating the token and having information around the token. Okay, are there any questions on this? We have 36 people. 36 people are getting it. Wow, that's pretty cool. Okay, no questions. This looks good. So these are smaller modules. I've just clubbed them into modules time kind structure. You could choose to take something from module 1 and build something from module 2 and build something from module 4, and that could be your hackathon participation for this particular series. Yeah. So moving on. This is a very important construct because when the regulatory people come in, you have to be able to show that you are compliant, you have the compliance, and also from an audit perspective, so that when you I just got muted. Are you able to hear me?
We can hear you, Pro.
Yes, bro.
Okay, so by mistake, I think. So this part is an important part, which is called the compliance and audit tools. Essentially, if you are able to build different components for this particular piece, this would be an interesting piece. So this is where you are able to query consent records. So essentially, you will be able to see what all things have been done in the consent. You could create compliance dashboards to be able to make sure that the data has been protected. You could look at the whole reporting process. See, there would be an overlap of some things from the other modules also. So if you want to kind of go cross and just take one from each, or you want to kind of focus on one particular module and build, you this module would be good enough for you to be able to participate in a hackathon, or maybe two smaller pieces in each one of the modules should be good enough, but you will have to give it some kind of a face. Yeah. So essentially like a query consent records. Yeah. So what you will do is you will show all the consent transaction that has happened. Yeah. So the consent transaction that has happened, what would be the best practices to be able to make sure that everything has been valid? And if this is done in a decentralized manner through a smart contract mechanism, we will be able to protect the privacy of the people also, and we will be able to demonstrate also that everything has been compliant because we followed a smart contract based model. So essentially, it is an audit of your smart contract model to be able to show how the consent has been managed. Same thing with the dashboard, life cycle reporting, compliance monitoring. So suppose we want to make sure that everything is compliant on a live basis. Now this could be a website, okay, where purchases are being made, and you want to make sure that everybody's privacy information is protected, right? Because there are a lot of things that are happening. Yeah. So this is another interesting area. This could be in a hospital place where you could have an automated compliance monitoring system, and then you could have an audit trail. This is basically what all things has happened, and you will be able to kind of publish the audit trail. So each one of these are connected with one another, but you could kind of create different interfaces for each one of them to be able to help people kind of build those things around them. Yeah. This is another module which we will be building exclusively around the India stack system. But when we are talking about a consent manager, this is another aspect, specific aspect that we want to look at. How can we implement zero knowledge proof? How can we demonstrate certain things that we are who we are without telling you who we are? So suppose if I tell you that I am over the age of 18, which which is very apparent by looking at me, but if you are not able to see me and you don't know that whether I'm over the age of 18 or not, how will you be able to get to know that? So I'll have to give you my birth certificate, I'll have to give you an Aadhaar verification. So essentially all the information will go to you. But what if I have some kind of a mechanism to be able to tell you I'm over the age of 18, and that's what you need to know, there's nothing else required, but that is managed by some kind of a system on the backend system. So that's where the zero knowledge proof comes into play. Sometimes it could be, if I am able to tell you, suppose one of the classic examples of zero knowledge proof is, suppose I tell you that I will be able to solve the Rubik cube in 3 seconds, or 3 seconds too fast, 7 seconds. Yeah. You'll be like, okay, I don't trust you, show me. Right. And when I'm doing that solution, you're recording it. So hence my intellectual property is stolen, because you will be able to get to know how it is can be solved in less than 7 seconds. But if I have a mechanism which is able to record that I actually did it in 7 seconds, and that mechanism is a decentralized mechanism which has kind of verified and validated that, and that token is given to you, then you will be able to know that yes, he indeed knows how to solve the Rubik cube in less than 7 minutes. Yeah. So this is the whole construct of zero knowledge proof. We could have zero knowledge proof in a multitude of ways. We could have very crude manners of in implementing zero knowledge proof. We could have very simple manner. I'll give you a simple example of one implementation of zero knowledge proof, one of the things that we are looking to see is whether a person is below poverty line. Okay. Or whether a person, forget below poverty line, a person is has a certain degree of education, and for that you have to get their matriculate certificate, you have to get their bachelor's certificate, you have to get their master's certificate, whatever. Yeah. Now, if I am able to present to you a zero knowledge proof token which shows that I have a certain degree of education, and this token has verified that. Now, this is a very crude way of putting zero knowledge proof, but that is a good, still a secure way of protecting the person's information. Yeah. Now, the other thing which is very important is that in some form or the other, we might have to store some kind of off chain data. Okay. Now I gave you an example of somebody's phone number, right? Now you might have to have that person's info phone number stored in an off-chain manner. How would you store it in an off-chain manner, in an encrypted manner, and create a hash of that data and write it in a blockchain so that when you have to verify that data, you will be able to verify it with the hash, but the data which is stored off-chain is encrypted. Yeah. Uh, you could have some kind of a security around state updates. You could have a cryptographic key management for this. Actually, we will be putting that very soon. We are using a construct called HashiCorp to be able to do a key management system where the the security is maintained by a key with with another server which is where is your setup, and this is a state of the art which is used by banks. Now, how can we kind of integrate that in signing any kind of credentials, any kind of consent related transaction? How can we use a cryptographic key management system to be able to secure that? And of course, tamper evident audit trail. So these are some that was kind of put in module 6, and module 7 is the real time notification. This is where you kind of open a listing port. People who have done who participated last year in the analytics aspect of in the of the blockchain and did some amazing project. In fact, one of the winners for the last year's open source competition developer challenge was an analytics project, and this is where those analytics would could come into play, specific to the consent management system, where you could do some kind of an event listening. You could have some kind of a trigger mechanism that if there is one person who's done 5 different accesses of their consent token, then it would say something that there is some kind of a problem happening here, and you are able to revoke that. You are able to configure different kinds of triggers so that somebody sitting in a dashboard gets to know that I issued 200 tokens today and only 50 were used. Why were 150 not used? Then that could be a business process where people could optimize the number of tokens and give tokens only on demand basis. So these are some examples of the real time notification, which is more or less like an analytics around the consent. So that's basically the 7 modules in gist, which I kind of ran through very quickly, and to be able to kind of show you this kind of an architecture of a consent manager, which you can use to be able which would be used in the consent manager, which would help us be compliant with the Digital Personal Protection Act of India. Now, there could be certain things which might be India specific. There could be certain things that could be taken off and be put into any kind of consent manager system. So the Digital Personal Protection Act of India is not built in a vacuum. It is built using the Protection Act, which is already there in Europe. Okay. Now, if I give you somebody a consent, right, there could be mechanisms where I could give 3 people consent. I'm just giving you a use case. Yeah. I give 3 people consent, and the operation will happen only if 2 of the 3 people sign. Yeah. This is like setting up some kind of a committee to be able to kind of do a decision on my behalf. Now, how will we able to kind of put those kind of things into perspective? These are some interesting features that you could build in an open source perspective, not necessarily what I have proposed. I've just given you some kind of a framework to kind of think and play around it. But if you are able to kind of create a token which or some kind of a consent token which three people own, two people when they kind of make a decision, two out of three make a decision, then it can be done, right? That would be a classic case of a consent manager. I mean, it's your imagination as to how you want to kind of see this whole consent management in action. Of course, our focus was the India Privacy Act, but that does not necessarily mean that that is the only architecture that you should be looking at. Anything that has to do with consent can very well be a part of this hackathon, and will be very well received. And we would love to kind of promote and ask applications to engage and integrate that open source component. All right. With that, I would just like to quickly like to kind of mention that the Algorand hack series is basically directed towards the new developers, seasoned developers, people who want to come to blockchain and learn things. We are providing you all the tools and resources to be able to kind of get you started really fast. This is going to be a bit of a scaffolding approach as long as you are willing to put in the time. And the competition is and this time is has a lot more incentives, a lot more partners, a lot more international visibility. So I encourage all of you to participate and give it a try. This is definitely something which will give you a lot of good exposure and also a learning process, right? It's not only exposure. It's not always that you should be looking for return for every single thing that you do, but if you do something good, you will be able to kind of demonstrate that in some other capacity at some point of time. So with that, I would like to kind of stop my presentation and open the floor for any kind of discussions or questions.
Prof, I have a question.
Yes, Maruti.
As you said, like we are recording the consent on the Algorand blockchain. So there will be a different entities where we are going to share our data, and who is the person are going to share the data. So how we can map them on the Algorand blockchain, with which company I am going to share the data, that should be recorded also. So is it also a module we can build it?
That can be done by a smart contract model, which would integrate with a Web2 system, Maruti, right? So if you are able to build a consent token, right? A consent token is just one consent token for your particular data. I mean, you could have multiple consent tokens also. You could give five consents to people, right? At one time. But imagine that you want to give that consent only once, right? So you have a consent token that you've mapped on Algorand, which actually opens the door to certain amount of encrypted data that is there, right? And then we could build some kind of an API interface to be able to kind of get the people to be able to hold the token. So essentially through a Web2 system, I transfer that token over to you. When you click on that application, you come to the blockchain platform to be able to kind of demonstrate that you indeed have been given that consent. So this is a smart contract piece. Once you get the consent opens the door for that information. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Any other questions?
If anyone has the question, if they don't want to unmute, they can put it in the chat box also. So we can solve it out. Like Prof is here, and you can ask the questions from AR consent manager for now, and then you can ask questions for different hack series tracks too. So it is a good chance to get a solid inputs from the senior like Prof. So please feel free to ask the questions.
Prof, as you said, we are partnering with MITI for this, but is it compulsory that we need to use some India stack here, or we can create only smart contract based consent manager?
That's a very good question, Meet. Of course, MITI is one of our focus areas and where we want to kind of demonstrate that the developers in India can build something which MITI will maintain. That's a big opportunity. But that being said, since we are calling it a consent manager, I don't want to limit it to the India stack only. Okay, this can be done through a multitude of ways. We are able to, as I mentioned, this like a consent to three people to be able to operate on my behalf, right? A power of attorney kind of a model, but a more secure power of attorney, yeah, or a power of attorney with certain kind of privileges only, yeah. Uh, I mean, a power of attorney is a consent, right? How will we implement a power of attorney in any kind of in a blockchain based system? That would be an amazing open source solution which so many applications of this world would use. Like, the lawyers are building so many applications on blockchain right now. But if you are specifically able to build a power of attorney system, if you're able to build a power of attorney for a specific thing, if you're able to split the power of attorney, right, that would be a much smarter system, right? uh, uh, so there is some question, yeah. So is it only government solution we need to work, or something related to content? It's consent, like guest entry management. Absolutely, guest entry management system. I feel like, going to India, I go to a restaurant, they ask for my phone number. I go to my families, they ask for a phone number. I think it is a complete breach of my privacy every time. Like, having lived here, in India, people come in and ask you for your cell phone number. Over here, nobody asks you for your cell phone number unless and until they know you, right? So, I mean, of course, we are a very open society and it's very nice, but, giving everybody your cell phone number, I don't know how many of you know, but these companies which were recording the cell phone number for gate passes in apartment buildings were actually selling those cell phone numbers to different marketing companies to be able to market things to you, and that was their most revenue source, which is actually illegal because you have not given access to your cell phone to be given to somebody else, yeah. So again, consent, the hack is consent, yeah. So build anything around consent with blockchain as a piece, that's absolutely fine, yeah. And build a module, think for a module, don't start looking at I mean, don't start looking at an end solution yet. Build the modules. We will help you wrap those modules in form of a use case to be able to demonstrate what you've built. You get me? Uh, because if you think of a use case, you might not build a very scalable module. You get me? And the module has to be scalable for you to be able to kind of get that kind of eyeballs. Suppose you build a module which is very specific to one particular thing, then it is specific to the problem. Maybe there will be five other people who will use it. You don't want five people to use it. We want 5,000 people to use it, right? So that's why it's important that whenever you build these modules, think from a very scalable perspective. That's the one of the key mantras of open source. And Meet, we are kind of looking at putting something as open source of the India Stack interface that we built. That the whole idea of identity or tokens in your wallet is, I mean, it's absurd that we have companies who are saying, I will put all the tokens in your wallet. Like, why do you have to put tokens in your wallet? There is Aadhaar and DigiLocker. We are going to open source that whole solution, and you don't have to put any token in your wallet. Just integrate that into your application and off you go. You're good to go. We are going to put that into open source very soon, and encourage developers like all the people over here to be able to use those applications and build rapid applications.
Yes, thank you.
So that was the question from Senthil also. Senthil, I think I answered your question. Any other questions with regards to consent? Otherwise, we'll move on to the hack series basic questions.
For the consent manager, what current solutions that in the Web2 have for the consent manager? These all participants can look and find the loopholes into it, and then they can go for how they can implement in the blockchain. Can you just share the examples where they can?
Yeah, I mean, see, current Web2 system for consent managers are built in every e-commerce site. Current Web2 system for consent manager is built in any payment site, right? When you actually, uh, I don't know if you kind of looked at the whole architecture of how your credit card information is actually transferred from one place to the other, right? So suppose, like, you go and buy on Swiggy, yeah, something on Swiggy, and you don't have a Swiggy wallet, but you are using your credit card, yeah. What's going to happen is Swiggy takes you to a payment interface, right? In the payment interface, there is a tokenization model for your credit card information. Your information is not sent out just like that. There is a token that is created. Okay, that token goes into the payment portal, right, with some kind of identification, and then it is unwrapped at the payment portal, and that payment portal then reads whether that information is accurate or not. But see, what's happening over here is this is centralized tokenization, right? What we so it's it's it, my use case would only be in a payment system, right? But what if it is your medical record, right? If you have a medical record, we could have a centralized tokenization or encryption model with which you can send an encryption key and that could be decrypted on the other way. But it takes a lot of computing power to do that, right? It is a waste of everybody's time, and plus you cannot create different views in that locking and unlocking part. Suppose I give you my health record, you're Dr. Maruti Patre, and you're looking at my blood report. Yeah, now at this point of time, Dr. Maruti Patre is just going to be looking at my blood report because he is a diabetes expert. Yeah, okay, but why do you need to know certain things in my blood report which has nothing to do with diabetes? You get me? See, as we are getting more and more aware of data, we are getting more and more conscious of what we want to share, what we don't want to share. In back in those days, when you come to a doctor, they will give you like 20 years of medical record. They'll just dump on the doctor's table. But now I will give Maruti Patre, because Maruti Patre also has to see 200 patients on that day. He also has to be optimized. So if I have an AI mechanism which runs on my blood report and says, hey, you're going to see a diabetes expert. So essentially, they will run that information and tokenize only that information that Maruti Patre needs to see. You get me? And then that would go to you, and you will be able to see that information. I have given you the consent to look at it. Okay. And now Maruti Patre cannot sell it to a medical research company to be able to do a study on me, because because that's one of the things that medical research companies are looking for, that a person of this particular age who is this high, this tall, has diabetes, let's see what is the best kind of medication, right? That information the medical research company has to source from me, not from Maruti. You get me? Right. So consent might appear to be a very complex construct, but it is a very simple construct. It basically, it empowers you essentially, right? It empowers people like you and me that my data is my data. If I share it with you, it is only because you need to see it, not because you will say, like, I remember when I used to go to um, the first time I came to United States, and even with my gray hair, I went to buy a very bad example, but a bottle of wine, and that person says, "Can I see an ID?" I said, "Do I look like I'm less than 25?" He said, "No, I still need to see an ID." Like, why do you need to see an ID? Like, I'm under 25. Why do you need? I don't look under 25. I'm not under 25. Why do you need to see an ID? He sees my ID. In my ID, it's my address. It's my date of birth. Everything is there. And that is person who's seeing. I don't know whether that person is wearing a Google Glass. Can just tap, get all my information, right? Get all private information. Why would I just to buy a bottle of wine, I have to let go of my privacy? You get me? What if I am able to demonstrate with a decentralized application that I'm over 25, and that should just fly, right? So this is what government of India has now started enforcing very interestingly, and I'm very happy that they are taking it very, very seriously. And what we have to do is we have to make sure that all the applications now are compliant to it. And if they're not, they will be fined, they will be banned, they will have a lot of problems, and they're really serious about it. Right. So, I mean, because I'm talking to these people in MITI, and they're like, we have to enforce it. It's enough is enough. Okay. Because digital India means unsecure India if we don't have all these things into play. So that's where blockchain comes into play big way, because if you build these modules, tomorrow Swiggy might be using your open source module to be able to secure that data. You get me? And that's the kind of opportunity that we have here.
Yeah, thanks, Ralph. I think these insights would be really helpful for the person.
Sure. Any other questions? Okay, I'll kind of open the floor for any other general questions, anything that you would want to know. No questions? Everybody is happy with the Shivratri today.
Anyone has the question, just use the chat box if you are not comfortable to unmute yourself. That would be helpful.
Another doubt is, as mentioned, the website hack series. We need to use Aadhaar and DigiLocker. And can we do it without? You don't need to do Aadhaar and DigiLocker integration, Senthil. What we are saying is Aadhaar and DigiLocker is an example where we will be able to demonstrate this. You cannot do Aadhaar and DigiLocker integration without getting the permission from MITI. In fact, their sandbox is, as of now, is very shallow. So you will actually not be able to do that because you can't get real Aadhaar and real DigiLocker integration unless and until you are an entity, and only then you get that access. So you should not worry about Aadhaar and DigiLocker integration as of now. You should be focusing on building those modules, and you can just create a database, which has an Aadhaar and DigiLocker connect, and that could just kind of be replaced by the interface which is provided to you, or when somebody uses your module, they will be able to connect the interface over there.
Or I will suggest that you can refer the sandbox test API and check the schema of their APIs and create the dummy data for that, and then that can be used for the consent manager. So in the future, if you want to integrate with the DigiLocker infrastructure, then you can easily integrate that. So you can create dummy API data for the DigiLocker and then integrate that with your module.
There is I have a question for healthcare data on blockchain. How will you make it private if we are just doing a consent manager, as blockchain is known for transparency, but healthcare data is not something? Oh, very good question. Okay. Now this is, so let me read the question so that everybody kind of gets from it. This is a question which talks about if blockchain is transparent and we talk about healthcare data, right? How do we kind of make sure that the data is private, right? So just a clarification here. Blockchain is not a store of data. Blockchain is a store of an information about the data, or a hack of the data, or a representation of a data, right? Now that representation of the data, or even the tokenization of the data, I mean, you could also store a signature of the data. So you could have your healthcare data in your phone. You could have your healthcare data in a secure offsite system where it is encrypted. What we are talking about is to write a smart contract which would create a particular token, okay, which could have some information about, either the token has information or the token has an access to this secure location. So somebody who gets that token will be able to access. It's like, uh, I give you, and if you go to a hotel, right, they give you an access card, correct? So essentially, the hotel gives you a consent to be able to go to a particular floor and use that access card in front of a door, right? You can't use that to multiple doors. So the hotel is a hotel, right? But you don't know what is going on in the other rooms. You don't get to see anything inside other rooms. Your key is only accessible for your particular room. Also, that key is programmed that on the day that you are going to be checking out, after that you try to go into the elevator or you go to the door, you will not be able to open it, right? So that's the same idea here. You have information stored in a particular room, right? And that information is encrypted also on top of that, so that it is secure. That is also another thing which I showed, that if you're storing it offsite, you have to have it secure. Yeah. But you are giving a key to someone to be able to take the elevator, to be able to go to the fourth floor, to be able to go room number 401, where there is a certain information. That information will decrypt. That person will be able to see that information for a certain time period. And after that time period, that person will not be able to go to the fourth floor and not be able to open the room 401 also. You get me? So your information stays private. The only thing is you are sharing what you have to share at the time you want to share, and you can revoke the sharing process whenever you want to. So there is no breach of data. In fact, data security gets enhanced because of blockchain. Don't see blockchain as a database. That's where people kind of tend to make a mistake. Oh, I'm putting all my health data on blockchain. That's not true. You don't put the health data on blockchain. You to put the signature of the health data on the blockchain, or you put a representation of the health data on the blockchain. That's right. Only the footprint of me sharing my data gets onto the blockchain, but the data stays private. And that's exactly what consent manager is. We are a consent manager. We will have, you could use a small data and you could create a token around it, and you could play around with giving consent, and people will be able to have access, and people who don't have consent will not have access to it. So it's pretty interesting, right? A consent manager, believe it or not, I mean, I'm going to give you a use case which is kind of pretty bizarre. A consent manager can be used to replace Airbnb. Okay, I can create a consent manager for my house, and I can give a consent to a person to come in and stay in my house for a particular period of time. And when they go, it gets revoked, and then the next person gets a consent. I create a consent token. That's it. And the consent token can have all the financial information embedded in it. So when the person comes in and stays in my house, there will be a hash of my house taken, and when they're leaving, the hash will be compared and the money will be taken off. Otherwise, I'll take money from the security deposit, and then and then the person leaves and everything is gone. So consent manager has multiple use cases. It's not only Miti or a consent manager can be a consent from a parent. It's saying that, okay, today my child is coming to school, and based on this, you will be able to take a picture of my child, right? You can't take a picture without my consent. A consent manager has so many different facets that we can't even think of at this point of time. But that's why it has to be built in a very scalable manner. Sure, Manav. Besides the consent manager, you have the consent to ask me any other questions. I'm giving you the token. So feel free to ask any other questions. I have 2 minutes that I can give you. Otherwise, we'll sign off pretty soon. So if you have anything, or otherwise, Maruti, as you know, is going to be leading the Bring Your Own project. Um, uh, BYOP, right? Yeah. Over here, when we go to a restaurant, it's called Bring Your Own Beverage. So you know what that means. Bring Your Own project. We will be also supporting Maruti because it seems that they will have a lot of people applying for that. Meet will be focusing on the ARC presentation that we had yesterday. Huge opportunity for people to be able to demonstrate their skills, and in multitude of ways. You can start as a simple developer to creating a new ARC. Sunil, who is also here, will be presenting to us the NFT marketplace, the different modules that would go into an NFT marketplace. And in fact, we are calling it an NFT marketplace, but that could very possibly be a marketplace in the future. NFT is just one of the placeholders here. NFT could be a carbon credit, and NFT could be a digital art, NFT could be a house, NFT could be a car. NFT could be your ticket to an event, right? So it's going to be very interesting piece that Sunil will be hosting, and I believe Sunil, you're hosting that on Saturday. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So that's our hack series this time, and I'm looking forward to participation. I'm looking forward to challenges, you know, that people want to take. Again, you could join in any level. This might sound to be very sophisticated and very complicated, but I want to tell you, if you are starting out, you will find an opportunity to participate in any one of these hacks, because we have all kinds of components. And just I also want to mention that anything open source is a part of the competition. We are not going to be judging from the complexity of the open source. We are going to be judging as what is the kind of impact your open source software is going to bring. So don't feel shy. Don't feel that, oh, what is the point that this is like only seasoned developers can participate. Anybody can participate and anybody can win. That's the whole idea here. Yeah. With that, we'll sign off for today. And thank you very much for all those of you who joined. I believe people who listen to this on a recording, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to address them. Have a nice evening, everyone.
Thank you, Nikhil. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Prof. Thank you, everybody.